Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's Pre-Earth Day digital discussion, Making Decarbonization a Reality with Renewables. Please use the comments section to post questions for today's panelists. Today's discussion is part of our Road to New Orleans, leading the way to SPI, ESI, and Smart Energy Week, this September 20th to the 23rd in New Orleans. Here you can find additional digital discussions, smart energy market tours, our outdoor roadshow events across the country, book and movie club discussions, as well as fun New Orleans-themed activities you can do at home. As a participant of today's discussion, you can take advantage of the special discount on your screen to save on your registration for SPI, ESI, and Smart Energy Week. This is good for new registrations through May 20th. Visit www.smartenergyweek.com for more information. And now, let's welcome our esteemed panelists. Julie Blunden, board member, New Energy Nexus. Paula Glover, president, the Alliance to Save Energy. Danielle Murfeld, vice president and CTO of GE Renewable Energy. And our moderator, Dan Sugar, CEO and founder of NextTracker.
Wonderful. Hi, my name is Dan Sugar. I am so excited to be joined today by some of our incredible leaders in the renewable energy and the electrify everything movement today. We're looking forward to a great discussion, and we appreciate Solar Power Events. I appreciate Solar Power Events asking me to put the panel together. You know, as we were thinking about it, we really wanted to bring in really every aspect of what it's going to take to decarbonize our economy. Renewable power generation, end use and energy efficiency, and electric mobility. And so as we thought about who are some of the key leaders in that, we came up with Julie, Danielle, and Paula. So really excited about that. You know, each of these uses and needs work together, and what we're going to accomplish today is understanding how each of these sectors have evolved, but then the interplay between them. And we really see a lot of synergy and opportunity for each of these technology vectors and market segments to complement each other. We're talking about already today many millions of jobs in supporting the industries that are providing these areas and the services, and we're going to go deeper into that and then talk about a vision of where it can go from here, both in the United States as well as overseas. So what I've asked each of our panelists to do is speak about where they are in the industry. We'll go through that and then talk about how we combine forces to take it further. Julie Blunden, it's been such a pleasure to work with you for over the years and seeing all the incredible accomplishments you've done. Today, could you frame for us electric mobility and what's happened, and then where we can go from here, and then we'll invite other panelists.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today with my esteemed panelists. First, let me say we're at an amazing juncture. We are so confident that we are going to have full electrification of the power sector on a renewable basis, that the idea of now making the transportation sector electrified means that we actually are electrifying with carbon-free energy. We will not only decarbonize the power sector, but by default then decarbonize our mobility sector. That is a fantastic position to be in. And I think even 10 years ago, we could hope for that, but we didn't see the conviction that we could show everybody that we're definitively there, and we are now there. If you look at what's in the queues in the transmission queues, it's renewables. That's what's coming, and we will retire fossil along the way. As we grow electric mobility in the United States and around the world, we're going to see things move incredibly quickly. In fact, more quickly than what we've seen in the power sector. And that's a function of the lifetime of a vehicle, really. It's also a function of the fact that we've been talking about electric mobility for 30 years. And the automakers have been thinking about it seriously for 10 and have been talking about it for the last 5. Why? Because in 1994, China decided that they were going to become a dominant force in the transportation industry and that they would do it through electric vehicles. They started illuminating that with the 13th five-year plan, and they are by far the #1 market for electric mobility in the world today. Europe is a distant #2, and actually North America and the United States, distant #3. However, by 2035, thanks to California executive order from Governor Newsom, we're going to stop selling new internal combustion engine vehicles. That is sparking a trend across the United States to think about when ICE vehicles will no longer be sold. And Washington State just last week passed a bill that would actually stop new ICE vehicle sales in 2030. So that's within the next decade. On top of that, we're looking at medium and heavy duty trucks being electrified much more quickly than expected. Just about a year ago, the California Air Resources Board took what was a planned truck rule to electrify medium and heavy duty fleets, and they accelerated it by a lot, so that within 5 years, we're going to see real truck electrification taking hold in California that will then propagate across the country. I think it's important to recognize that because of that, we are going to see more electricity required for transportation, maybe a 20% increase roughly by 2030. And that's about another 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy and batteries that we'll need to add to our grid. We'll also be able to manage our grid a little bit differently because we can manage charging. That's actually a benefit. More kilowatt hours sold means lower rate pressure, and more managed resources means better ability to accommodate variable renewables as the bulk of what's in our power system. Along the way, we're also going to be able to build more manufacturing in the US, and I can get into that a little bit later, but the scale of what we're going to do for battery manufacturing in the US, although we are behind compared to China and to the European Union, nevertheless, we currently have closing in on a dozen battery manufacturing plants in the pipeline in the US, and that number is likely to quadruple between now and the end of the decade. That's bringing jobs. Today, jobs in the auto sector, manufacturing, about 1 million, dealerships, about 2 million. If you look at what we're talking about, the new gigafab in Austin for Tesla, 15,000 jobs. They come in big chunks. So we're at a point where we've got tremendous opportunity and confidence that where we're going in the United States is fully electrified energy all the way to your car and the truck delivering your Amazon package.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. That's very inspired, Julie. Paula Glover, it's such a pleasure to have you on our panel. And within the last year, you've actually taken over leadership of the Alliance to Save Energy, and you bring fresh eyes to energy efficiency and how to bring that to the building sector and other sectors. And would love to hear your perspectives on where that is and how it integrates into power generation and mobility.
Sure. Thank you so much, Stan, for the invitation and for having me, and for me getting to be on this panel with, quite frankly, and should not go unsaid nor unnoticed, 2 tremendous women, which is also something we would not have seen 5 or 10 years ago. So that's really extra special. I would say for energy efficiency, and as we're talking about decarbonization, energy efficiency is like akin to a bridge fuel, in that the more that we are able to save, it has multiple impacts that can really then help us address our needs around climate change. In fact, ACEEE recently issued a report that tells us that we could hit 50% of our decarbonization goals by 2050 just through energy efficiency. And so that's significant. But that doesn't mean that we're not without our own individual challenges that I think we can meet, but that we certainly need to address and identify. As Julie said towards the end of her remarks, we are in a point in time where there are lots of interest around what we're trying to do. And also lots of opportunities. And so we're not just talking about addressing climate change, we are also talking about how do we address the economic inequalities that we have in this country. And efficiency is well poised to do that. Currently, we support 2.4 million jobs in the efficiency world. And so that is more than solar and wind combined. We are the largest employer of kind of the clean energy sector. But if we expand efficiency, and what I mean by that is universal access to efficiency so that all customers, large and small, in all areas of this country are able to take advantage of the source, our resources, we now would add another 1.3, 1.4 million jobs to the existing 2.4. And that's a huge number, and that's exciting. In addition to that, and what makes, I think, energy efficiency additionally unique is that our jobs exist in 99.8 counties in the United States. So that's almost everywhere, right? 99.8 counties is telling you that 0.2 is like where nobody lives. And so we have the opportunity to have a really broad economic impact. In addition to being able to help customers, efficiency workers, those are individuals who may work in construction, IT, all kinds of jobs, but also small businesses, because those organizations and companies that do efficiency work are local. And so we are talking about how do small businesses or medium-sized businesses in their own communities are able to employ people in those communities, as well as help them save consumers to save money and for us to better the planet. It is, I think, a win-win-win, and the story for efficiency can only get better as time goes on, but we need to have the right policies in place today, and we need to be really thoughtful about the decision-making that we do. And then finally, I would say is in this day and time, we have a new administration who has identified equity as one of its top priorities through its Justice 40 initiative and others. And that is not without its own set of challenges. We are talking about, in terms of those priorities, how do we now bring communities who have been left behind for decades and decades, which means that we need investment. And we need to make greater investment in many of those communities, not just in our infrastructure. And I'm talking physical infrastructure, but I'm also talking about education. I'm talking about broadband. There are lots of things that need to happen. And there may be opportunities in some areas to kind of jump over some things, but the fact that our administration and I think our industry, we are all keenly focused and aware of the multitude of problems in these communities, I think means that we're well poised to address them and not shy away from them, but really do the hard work and thinking that's required. So with all of that, I would say, energy efficiency is our first stop. It's a tool that we have in place now. We should not forget about it. And why I so appreciate being a part of this panel in particular is that it's obvious that you guys recognize the role that efficiency can play in our decarbonization goals.
Very well said, and thank you for that perspective. I appreciate you bringing up the diversity and inclusion aspects, and we will be coming back to that on this panel. Well, Daniel Muirfeld, here you are, Chief Technology Officer of General Electric. 140 years ago, Thomas Edison was building Pearl Street Station, which was the first power generating facility in the precursor of General Electric. And here you are as CTO of GE Renewable Energy, driving that forward. So very, very interested in your comments, and thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Dan. And I do appreciate you drawing a direct line from Thomas Edison to me. So that feels really good.
The new improved version, much improved version.
So I would say one of the things that I'm sure many in the already know is just and Julie mentioned it before, the pace is incredible. And it's not just the pace of expansion, how much more renewables we see on the grid. It's also the pace of the cost reductions, the pace of access. I'd love to see the pace of permitting, feel that same kind of spark, but just to lay out some of the context for everyone who might not know the details. So solar and wind have both come down, 90 or 50% respectively in the last decade in cost. And they already, I think it was even just a few years ago, have reached the first tipping point where it is lower cost, it's cheaper essentially to build a new wind farm than it is to build a new gas plant or coal facility or steam facility. We're going to reach the second tipping point within anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on who you ask, where it's going to be cheaper to build a new wind farm than it will be to continue to operate an existing conventional power plant. That's going to change, that'll unleash even more capital and more incentive to build out renewables. There's always a concern about how much renewables can the grid hold, or how much before we start to see stability issues, or can I watch TV if the wind's not blowing? I mean, I'll just say, to put some of that to bed pretty quickly, we have the capability to have a pretty significant portion of our grid be renewables without any big changes, even more than double what we have now. And then beyond that, it's minor changes. So there's different phases of how much penetration of renewables starts to impact our grid operation. But we could get up to 80%, I would guess, with technology that exists today. Not all of it's deployed, but it's not to be invented. Let me just round the curve on all the different renewables hot topics. Offshore wind is probably one of my favorite lately, just because it gives a whole new perspective on how do you build large renewable farms near huge population centers without having to build, and it's not so much that it's a bad thing, but it takes time, big transmission. We're going to need more transmission in this country. Don't get me wrong. We're going to need a lot of it because we want resilience. We want to have the ability to suck the most out of the wind and the sun and the water that we have. We're very gifted with lots of bountiful renewable energy in this country, but in any one place, you're going to be restricted. Now, the reason why I love offshore is, especially off the northeast coast of the US, that's where your big population centers are. In fact, just last week, I saw a map showing if you took like the strips along the east and west coast of the country, only about 20 miles in, and you took all the population in that area, it's the same population as if you start at Chicago and go all the way down to Gulf of Mexico, everything west of there, except for the strip, of course, along the coast. Same population on the two coasts versus more than 2/3 of the heartland of the country. So putting all the wind in the middle of the country is great because that's where the wind is, but you're going to have to find a way to get it to the coasts unless you can build offshore wind. And the scale of offshore wind systems are growing so that it becomes even more effective to do that and lower cost. Solar is fantastic because not only is solar becoming lower cost and we're enabling more capability, more efficiencies, but hybridizing solar with storage and wind, for that matter as well, has now unleashed even more solar capability, because now you're not peaking out, you're not cannibalizing the value at certain times of day, you're extending that value into the peak, off-peak hours, spreading out your resource, to have more value from it, and also being able to manage your grid even better. So you're adding all these resources and capability to support even more renewable penetration. So I won't get into the grid topics too much, but I just think it's important to note that renewables is great. And if we want to have it truly implemented across our countries around the world, we're going to have to find a way to build it as a combined system with the electric grid, which our grid here in the US is the largest, most complicated machine ever built by humans. So we have to keep that in mind. It doesn't work differently in one part of the country than another. You might see different challenges, but it requires a system solution that, the utilities, the system operators, even renewable OEMs like GE Renewable Energy, we're working together to try to build that blueprint for the future. And one last thing, if I could just mention it, the whole idea of decarbonizing the electricity or the energy sector is drive as much renewable energy into the electrical sector as possible. So make it clean, then electrify everything you can, as Julie would say, including our transportation sector, buildings, industry, and whatever is left is probably going to be carbon capture, which will have a place at some point, and hydrogen or its derivatives. But guess how you make green hydrogen? Green energy, and it's a big amount. It might even be more, just to support the hydrogen that is in use today in industry, is likely on the same order of the total amount of renewable energy installed on the planet today. So if we're talking about building that out, that might be as much energy as we need to make hydrogen as we use to make electricity today. So it's just exciting growth area in general.
Wonderful. I really appreciate those three overviews. Before we get into audience questions, now let's do a little bit of how these different technologies and business sectors work together. Let's start with electric mobility. So, Julie, how do you see the intersections with some of the renewable energy power generation progress and the buildings activity that Paul spoke about? How do you see those working together?
Well, the really good news is that when it comes to electric mobility, it is by its nature distributed, which means that as we work to upgrade our buildings, making them more efficient, we can also add the electrical panel that allows them to charge depending on whether they're residential or commercial electric vehicles at the same time. The cost of putting in electric vehicle charging infrastructure that's slower charging, meaning overnight or during the course of a day, really is modest in the scheme of things, far cheaper than putting even solar panels on parking lots today. So that's almost not quite a gimme, but given the amount of funding that we already have embedded, thanks to the Dieselgate settlement from Volkswagen and the current state and federal funding, particularly under the Biden administration plans, our opportunity to provide plenty of charging in places that are already going to be a focus for investment is high. So it's a fantastic moment to basically intertwine the charging infrastructure needs for electrification with the other things that we're already planning to do, whether it's solar panels on parking lots or whether it's solar plus batteries for resilience in the Gulf Coast, in California, or other flood zones. Adding charging into that conversation is going to be, just like we've started talking about solar plus storage, we're going to talk about solar plus storage plus charging very quickly. Great.
Paula, would you like to build on that?
I think all I would say, and I think Julie's made some great points, is that we if I think about the equity conversation, we want to, again, make sure that our infrastructure, our foundational infrastructure for communities is set so that those communities can also have charging in their homes, on their streets, and not somewhere else. And so, I think it's a great example of when we start talking about the right kinds of policies and the investments that are required. Charging is a great place to start. The administration has identified the need to build 500,000 charging stations, many of those which will go into disadvantaged communities. We want to make sure that the foundational infrastructure is in place, because it won't only just benefit be to the benefit of charging, it's going to be the benefit of a lot of other things that we're trying to do. So it's great because charging may be the reason that we show up in those communities, but there's a benefit that goes way beyond that when you do the right work.
Great. And so Danielle, you spoke about the energy efficiency at work in my office. I'm not moving around enough, and the motion. Okay, now it's back on. I need to be a little more animated here. So you spoke about the amazing progress in wind and solar, and how they're working with storage and where it goes to the grid. I've been very intrigued by the whole vehicle to grid technology, and my understanding is some manufacturers like Tesla have a lot of capability already embedded in the cars. They have radios to receive information about what the real-time marginal cost is in the of power. So where is that? Why haven't we seen that? And what's the opportunity and the progress? I mean, Julie was talking about a terawatt, if I got that right, of new power generation for electric mobility. So how's this going to play out and and intersect with both buildings and mobility and the power grid?
So you're right, Dan, that the technology exists and is even in some cases being built out and put out in the world, which is such an exciting thing to think about, that it's there. It's sort of just like anything else. You have to just find a way to turn it on and use it. And Julie will be able to expound on this with even more insights. But the biggest hurdle in my mind right now is the market. How will people be rewarded for participating in these schemes? Whether it's an energy efficiency play, whether it's allowing a demand response, or whether it's allowing their stored charge to be put back onto the grid in times of need. Just earlier this week, I was learning more about what was going on in California last year, and I was surprised to learn that even the voluntary activities of individuals doing work at the home level, so this is consumer level, which is far lower than industrial use case electricity demand. Even that, a lot of people doing a little bit to help the grid goes a long way. I still would like to learn a lot more about that, but that doesn't work if we're not incentivizing people to do it, as my dog agrees.
Right, right. Well, Julie, recently you were a senior executive of a EV charging company. And so, it just seems to me like, yeah, we can put storage at all the renewable power generating plants. Some of that makes sense. But if you have an electric vehicle that's, maybe you don't need 100% of your 100 kilowatt hours or 120 kilowatt hours now in these vehicles all the time. How will that be monetized? And is that maybe a better construct longer term to address integrating intermittent renewables with the grid? And when are we going to see it?
Yeah, so it's fascinating to watch customer behavior. People, just think about your phone. When you get up in the morning and you grab your phone, you expect it to be 100% charged. You charge it overnight next to your bed, probably. It probably woke you up. And you grab it and go. You might charge it in your car. You might charge it at your desk when you go back to your office. And if you're in the airport, even if you can't get to 100%, before you get on the airplane, you charge it for what, if you're down to 30%, you'll charge it up to 50 before you get on the flight, right? That notion of having close to full on your phone is something that you intuitively understand. Customers currently look at their car the same way. They don't think about it the same as an ICE vehicle. They don't wait to get down to that last bar to go to the gas station. Why not? Because customers hate pumping gas. It turns out it's an unpleasant experience. It smells, yuck. In contrast, charging up your vehicle, as I do in my garage on a level 1 basis, might I ask, level 1 charging all the time. My car is always plugged into the garage. I get in my car and by and large, it's fully charged or close to fully charged. The idea that I get in my car and actually they needed my car earlier this morning and it used to be at 80% charge and now it's 50 and wait a minute, I'm going to go somewhere today, that doesn't work for people conceptually. I'm not telling you it's not going to, but I point out that managed charging is probably the first chunk of benefit that will be gained. If you have a fleet of Amazon Rivian vehicles, and I've seen my first Rivian serving Amazon in LA, you can charge that fleet in all kinds of load shapes overnight to accommodate what the grid or your particular distribution connection requires. Managed charging is a gimme. We're definitely going to do that, not for public fast charging, but for everything else. Next step is, how do you create some value? And that may not look like depleting the battery as much as other kinds of ancillary like services. Again, I'm not sure it's consumer first, it may be fleets first, but that all is going to get worked out here, I'd say, by 2030. We're going to see all of these conversations get to kind of where the real big value is. What I want to point out, though, and this goes back to something Paula said, the value of these conversations around electric vehicles, even if they don't lead to the thing that people kind of want to talk about, it requires to have the conversation like we're having under FERC 2222. How will we take advantage of distributed resources? The one that is so obvious is to take way better value out of our existing efficiency and demand response capabilities. That is there waiting for us today. And our demand response capabilities are very limited in certain RTOs, not widespread across the country. We should be able to fix that in a couple of years. And that, again, is kind of a step 1 that informs all kinds of other conversations. So, Paula, I look forward to seeing you participate in the FERC activities.
Great. Okay, let's move to audience questions. So we had some advanced questions and folks that sent those in. Thank you very much. Paula, thank you for bringing up the diversity and equity topic. We had an audience question on that. Could you reflect on that and continue that dialogue?
Sure, I'd love to, and thank you for the question. So for the audience, the question basically asked, like, what are some things that we can do? Are there some best practices, et cetera, around diversity, equity, inclusion? And I would just say, really simply put, is that we all need to be a little bit more creative. So diversity, equity, inclusion. So diversity, it's workforce, and then I would also add business. I think those are there are two components to that. So if we're talking about how do we broaden and have a more representative group of people in our organizations, then that really requires that we think about where are we recruiting people, how do we recruit employees, and how do we create a pipeline for existing employees to move throughout an organization for those who are interested into leadership or move into other organizations. And we have to do all of that. We can't just start with recruitment and hope that the back end happens. We have to be deliberate about all of those steps. And that would include leadership and our boards, all of that together. And so when we're thinking about where we're recruiting, I would say, look, we should be looking at our minority serving institutions for sure. But many of the opportunities that we have in energy efficiency specifically are not necessarily always four-year degree programs. And so we do need to be having unique partnerships with labor, with community colleges and certificate programs, with high schools in other communities. We have to do all of that. And then on the other side, we need to be thinking about who are we doing business with, and those that we do business with, who are they doing business with? Because all of that is going to matter in a really significant way. And again, with energy efficiency, because our jobs and our opportunities tend to be far more locally focused, we have a great opportunity in our sector to really diversify and to use WMBEs, right, women and minority-owned businesses to do our work. But we also, I think, have to think about those processes that we put in place that may naturally leave people out. And an example I would just use is, what are the requirements that we are looking for? And are you asking people to meet a requirement that's a nice to have or a must have? And sometimes what we think we have to have is actually something that we like because the person before who had the role had it. It's not something that you need. We need to think about, do people have to have a particular type of job, or do they have to have a particular type of skill? And all of that is going to absolutely matter. And then the other thing, which is somewhat related, is, at the Alliance, when we talk about the future and efficiency, we talk about active efficiency and the digitization of the grid and all the efficiencies that will come out of that. And so again, as part of the broader diversity equity conversation, we need to now think about all the other things that interconnect with what we're interested in. In the case of active efficiency, it's also connectedness, access to broadband, building the middle mile. And I would just say, for our industry, so much we focus on the coast, people who live on the coast, as Danielle talked about. We are going to have to spend a lot of extra time and attention on people who live in the Rust Belt in the middle of the country, because they are having the same types of issues, and we need to be acutely aware of what those issues are and those sensitivities. And when we think about diversity and equity and inclusion, we need to be thinking about what are the resources that those communities in Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa, et cetera, need, as well as Atlanta, Los Angeles, Texas, across the country. So it's a little bit different for everybody, but everyone deserves that type of attention.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing it up. Last year, after the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor incidents, we've seen a lot of racism attacking not just color of your skin, but other ethnicities, religions. We've seen all kinds of things. We've had this situation with the Asian violence recently. We had the Charlottesville thing, which had a racism thing, an anti-Semitism component. Before that, we had the situation with the immigrants and of people of Latino descent. So some in the solar industry, some leaders. It was started by actually Yuri Horowitz, CEO of Sol Systems. And a bunch of companies have really engaged in this. We've created an organization called Renewables Forward. And if folks are interested in getting engaged in this, please do. Renewablesforward.com provides the background, the information. So we've banded together to, as solar, speaking about solar for a moment, as one of the fastest growing industries in the United States and the world, we really want, as our industry grows, everyone to be on the train. And so what we've done is, this has been a great forum for us first to just get more educated about what some of the issues are, and then how we can address it. And out of that have come some, very practical, simple things. Like, I'll speak to what we're doing at my company at Nextracker. When candidates apply to our company, we're screening the names off the resumes. We all have implicit biases. So when we're choosing, well, who should we look at for a first round of interviews, let's really focus on their qualifications and not, looking at the name and maybe having some implicit bias. That's like a very simple thing. What we've also done at my company, and others have come up with, this is a huge issue to unpack, but just speak about very practical things. We also we have if one of our employees refers a candidate to the company, we end up hiring them, we provide a bonus, a referral bonus. Well, we doubled that for employees that are hired of diversity background, and that's actually yielded some results. So let's make sure our own house is in order. And while we're trying to solve these, broader systemic societal issues. So Danielle and Julia, I'd invite any perspectives you have and areas you touch on this subject before we move on.
Oh, I think Paula said it really well. And Dan, it's great to hear what the industry is already doing. The thing I really like about renewables in general, I won't speak to any one particular technology or product, is that it's inherently more accessible. Even though I think when we talk about EVs, there's still a lot of questions about, how can, when can broader parts of our population, especially the less economic, at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, when can they start to afford it? It's the tipping point. It already is a lower cost life cycle. Once it's a lower cost first point of entry, it's just done. And I think that's the thing I really like about so many of these technologies, is it just democratizes access. And it gives farmers in Iowa another source of income. There have been real great use cases, and I've got to visit one where people stay in business because they have put renewable energy on their land. I mean, that's a great story. It's a great way to think about utilizing our resources and putting that capability in the hands of people that would not normally be big energy sector players, but it changes the rules. And I think the piece that we have to keep in mind is that this is great. The trends are positive. And when there's money to be made, our biases kick in and the old guard comes back and finds a way to claw their way into that value. We have to just ensure that that we're going forward in a different way than we look back. In the energy sector is just one example as the world's changing so much. So it's great to hear us be deliberate and more capable in thinking about what we need to do, and less responsive, but more proactive.
Julie, before I'm going to hand the baton to you just a sec. There was a question submitted online. It says, installing EV charging stations in disadvantaged communities assumes the member of those communities can afford to buy a new EV, which they don't. So who do they advantage? Now, before you answer that, I just one of my little fun facts about EVs is that if you look at a traditional internal combustion engine car and you just say, how many, I'm a manufacturer, right, at our company at Nextracker. How many components are in a traditional internal combustion car? It's about 10,000 components. So if you take out every little part and put it on a sheet on your driveway, you'll have 10,000 parts there. If you take apart an EV, there's only about 1,000 parts. And we've seen, batteries costs come down by an order of magnitude with sort of no end in sight. So, riffing on what Danielle said about, hey, already the life cycle cost of the EV is lower than the internal combustion car. soon we're going to see the first cost lower. In China, they have right now they're selling a car. It doesn't have a crazy, a huge range, but it's like less than $6,000 first cost. So, what's your take on this? If you can respond to the question that was posed and your perspective on this.
Yeah, love to. First, let me talk about the car cost question, and then I'm going to turn to equity and manufacturing locations. So with regard to first cost, you're right, Dan. GM just announced this week at the Shanghai Auto Show a $4,400 equivalent cost cute car with their Chinese partner. One of the benefits of having China participate in the auto sector at an extremely competitive level is it's going to require some U-turns in terms of how the US has been selling cars. New cars in the United States for the last 2 years are more likely to be trucks than cars. We sell pickup trucks in the United States and SUVs more than 50% of new cars. So sedans are passé in the US, but I do think that because we're going to have the Wild West of new car delivery by about 2025 in the United States, everybody and their brother is going to try to differentiate. There's going to be a lot of similar looking SUVs, but there's going to also be the Cybertruck, the Ford F-150, where you can actually, as a contractor, charge your electric equipment from your truck instead of needing to bring along a generator. We're also going to have the new version of sports cars and convertibles and something different for everyone. And I believe we're going to see cars that come in under $10,000. It'll be fascinating because people are going to be killing themselves to get a share of market and establish brand identity in the United States in the second half of this decade. I am not saying that every person is going to buy a new car, far from it. But what we are going to do and already have is demonstrated that cash for clunkers works. If you've got a dirty old vehicle, I think the probability that we have a cash for clunkers program is high, which means you can have cash in your pocket, plus incentives for electric vehicles, even if they are used. In California, if you qualify, you can get incentives to buy a used electric vehicle today. So I think there will be opportunities that drive charging across the state. I personally am not concerned about access to charging because of the programs we already have established and the fact that in many disadvantaged communities, they are, to their detriment from an air quality perspective, close to transportation major intersections already. That makes it actually attractive for a company like my old company, EVgo, to actually look for locations, often in retail, in those locations that do provide access. You don't have to have an electric vehicle public fast charger down the street from you. You need to have it within about a 5-mile radius to make it convenient for you. That actually changes the dynamics, the geometry of the design for a network. Let me just say one word about equity, because that was the original construct here. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate, Paula, your points about making sure that we have support for all communities that are disadvantaged, including areas, for example, the coal miners that came out yesterday in support of renewable energy plans from President Biden. That strikes me as a very important signal to labor groups across the country. But it also suggests that as we think about the pockets of the country that are less populated, there's an opportunity for us to make a decision to invest. A great example is the southeast corner of California, Imperial County, worst hit county in California for COVID, very disadvantaged community, but it has an amazing resource in its geothermal production today, which, if we succeed with projects already funded and underway, we'll be able to extract lithium from existing geothermal power plant brine. Berkshire Hathaway has been funded by the Energy Commission and the Department of Energy to work on this for the next 2 years. And there's a commission, the Blue Ribbon Commission for Lithium Valley, supported by the Energy Commission in California, that is specifically looking at ways to make sure that investments that are made in Lithium Valley around the Salton Sea actually support and promote prosperity across all populations. I think that's really a market concept that marries with a political concept that offers an opportunity unique when we are going through a major industry transformation like we are right now, that can create wealth and prosperity in a community that desperately needs it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Daniel, would you like to, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that just aligns with this view of what's changing and how does that, why does that matter? And it's not just that everything is becoming electrified and now we're going to have more, we need to make sure that we have access to that electrification, as Julie was describing with EVs. But it's just a side note, Dan, but I thought it would be worth sharing.
Yeah.
You know, many of the technologies, or many of the sectors, I should say, that are not electrified today, that are becoming electrified. So I'm not talking about, you know, electricity. This is things like fuels. There actually is a tremendous efficiency just in moving from a fuel burning concept to an electric concept, meaning your primary power that goes into the system might need to be 3 times larger if your system is about burning fuel, which makes heat and it makes energy that you can use to propel the car forward. Whereas if it's an electrical engine, if it's an electrical based system, those are typically above 90% efficiency, not 30% efficiency, which is, you know, what you might see in an ICE car. And immediately you don't need as much energy to do the same work. So I think there's a whole perspective from a macro view of what is this country or what does a global population need to do in terms of replacing that primary energy with a clean source. If you're electrifying, generally you don't need to replace all of it. You only need to replace some of it because you're going to use more of it to do the work that you intended to do in that transportation sector or building sector or industrial sector. It's a side note, but I think it's just something that people don't always think about, and it makes the challenge a little bit more palatable, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, also just, you know, in the home example, one of the things I've been really struck with is how much the heat pump for water heating, in particular, technology has evolved in the last 5 years. So I had designed and built a LEED Platinum house about 10 years ago. And this technology didn't exist then. Well, today, so if you look at, let's just speak about California for a moment. Half the gas consumed in residential in the home is for just water heating, okay? So you can go to, you know, Home Depot or an equivalent, a retail place for homeowners, buy a heat pump water heater for your home that eliminates that gas use and saves you over the life of that appliance about $2,000 to $5,000 net over the life of the appliance in lower the gas costs. Now, what's interesting about it also is I have one of these operating in my house. You can actually have, it comes with a free app that's on your phone, and you can very easily program it to, in this case, let's say, set your water temperature at your house at, let's say, 125 degrees in the morning, and then when solar comes, as the solar is coming in, you can turn up the temperature. So during the day, you can have, if you have solar in your house or solar's low cost on the grid, you can turn it up to like 130 or 135 degrees, and then go down. You go down at the like 5 o'clock in the afternoon when the solar's coming off. So you can build in, not only is it a lower cost appliance that eliminates the gas, that saves you thousands of dollars over life, but with a very simple user-operated command, which could also theoretically happen by a radio or a preset, you can get a ride-through, a huge amount of ride-through onto the grid with that. Okay, transitioning, we had another participant question related to how microgrids might offset the high cost of traditional electric transmission and storage. So I'll just throw that out there to whoever wants to jump on it.
Julie, you want to go first?
Sure. We've entered a new era of climate consequence, and it's everywhere. It's tornadoes, it's wider and slower hurricanes, it is worse fire season in not just the western half of the country, but actually in the upper Midwest. We had fires in the Everglades. The consequence is an appetite for resilient grid operation, which is going to change the conversation around what the next round of infrastructure development is going to be from the investor-owned utilities. PG&E has actually started to, and they should, has started thinking pretty hard about this in a constructive way. I wish they were able to focus more of their external communications on things like this, but perhaps later. I think that transmission will get built. It will get slowly, and there'll be some places it just doesn't get done. Microgrids, which grow out of this idea of distributed generation coming out and helping at the distribution edges, can happen a lot faster. In fact, I just got a postcard in my mailbox for the Palisades microgrid group. And I looked it up yesterday, and yes, indeed, we're talking about putting a microgrid in my local community. I think that this is one of those things where we call it a microgrid today. What it actually looks like tomorrow is maybe 3 or 4 different things, but that the need for resilience planning and people really feeling like they've got not hit once or twice, but 3 or 4 times within 7 or 8 years, that is going to change the conversation.
Yeah, and the microgrid. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, Dan.
Well, I'm just definitionally. So a microgrid could be as small as you have a single load in your house. Like I have an aquarium in my house. I have a little UPS. So if the power goes out, the water keeps circulating for 24 hours. Okay, then my house is also a microgrid. I actually do have a little battery where I separate the loads versus non-critical loads like the hot tub, although you could argue the hot tub is an essential. Let's ignore that for a minute. So we separate out the big loads that are, quote, not essential, and then there's a battery. And so for the residential providers like the Sunruns and so forth that are Tesla that are offering these, a lot of now residential customers are going to market. But we can also think of microgrid at a community level. Now, there's a transmission planner for PG&E. So there are some places that have staggeringly high cost of service. So with what's happened with the cost of wind and solar and storage, a combination of those resources could allow a community to carry over. In fact, but you could have interconnect, but resources within those areas. So, okay, Danielle, please.
Yeah, I was just going to comment for anyone who's not as familiar with the differences between like a cost structure for a microgrid versus a central utility scale power generation. The easiest way to think about it is microgrids, like when you're making a small amount of power, whether it's rooftop solar or small, wind or geothermal, it's generally more expensive to have smaller systems than these big, hundreds of megawatts or even gigawatt scale central systems. But you don't need to pay to, distribute or transmit this across hundreds of kilometers. So there's a balance of capital costs for the generation and the infrastructure to move it around in a small space versus the capital costs are cheaper to generate it, but more expensive to move it around. The important thing to understand is when you're developing a robust, resilient system, you need both. And like Julie said, you're going to have weather events and emergencies that might take out a region's distributed small local capability. Good thing they're linked to a part of the country that didn't have a hurricane the week before, or is not having a fire, or isn't in the middle of some kind of cold snap. That's the resilience part of what we will be investing in within the grid. And I think personally, I'm always looking at the bright side of things. I think we're a little lucky that we have underinvested in our infrastructure so much, because there's absolutely no reason why we wouldn't want to spend money as a country, or even I would say many parts of the world, unfortunately, have this issue, to upgrade our infrastructure. And good thing we didn't just invest in the old technology a decade ago, because it wouldn't be depleted yet. But now it is. We're all ready to say goodbye, and the next dollar should be spent on the future. It's easy.
Great.
Dan, I'd love to add
Please.
to this if you don't mind,
Please.
because I think
Sure.
the conversation around resilience is actually incredibly important. And if we think about what happened in Texas just a short while ago, there is a renewed focus on resilience. And even in that scenario, energy efficiency could have played a huge part in making not that situation go away for sure, but certainly reducing some of the angst for people. Because as Julie started in her comment, right, we are seeing extreme weather events as a result of climate around this country. But we do have areas of the country who do not weatherize the same way that they do in the Northeast, for example. Mm-hmm. And that's not just inside people's homes, that's also facilities, right? Our natural gas plants, our electric, all of that. And so our ability to, I think about efficiency, even in those types of scenarios, there are reports that say, having efficiency may have increased capacity in Texas by about 20%, had some of the things that we see happening in other areas of the country be instituted in Texas. And so the conversation around resilience is an important one. And I think to Danielle's point, it's not one for us to shy away from, but it is one that we need to be really creative about how we address resilience and look at all the tools that are available to us, energy efficiency just being one of those, as well as microgrids, et cetera.
Great. Okay, thanks for that perspective. We have about 5 minutes left. We have focused our conversation today, most of it's been around the United States. We've spoken about technology, which is globally ubiquitous, that capability. But I'd like to spend just a few minutes speaking about what's happening overseas as well. So our company, Nextracker, we have over 50 gigawatts of solar structures and control systems and software operating around the world. What we've seen is just an explosion of demand for these systems in places that one wouldn't have expected there to be such vibrant growth. And the reason is that the cost of these systems, as Danielle spoke to, is lower than the cost. As energy demand generally is grows a lot faster in the developing world than the United States, where it's relatively flat. It has been, but these new technologies with mobility and appliances like we spoke to, water heating in the home, are going to stimulate more demand growth in the U.S. But so we've seen for a new resource, because the solar and wind are lower cost, tremendous growth all around the world. So I'd like to just throw it out and see if anyone has any perspectives in the few minutes we have left.
I'll just add real quick. I think we can learn a lot from Europe, especially within their grid work that they're doing to collaborate. And SOE is the name of the organization that brings all of the system operators together to decide on the blueprint for the future. So they're all investing in the same general direction. And I think there's a lot that the US can learn from being deliberate and long-term thinking in terms of, especially China, but I'm seeing it across Asia. There's a lot of really big thinking and grand vision. That's pretty exciting.
Here. Europe has pointed the way on electrification of vehicles. The US should pay attention.
Great. Paula, do you have any concluding remarks?
I mean, I'm gonna just sing the same song I've been singing the entire time. Even in Europe, energy efficiency plays a key role in electrification and resiliency of the grid. And so just not to leave that behind, but to think about what universal access looks like and what universal access requires, so that we don't make the mistakes of the past and repeat those mistakes by increasing the disparity. What I want to make sure is that our stuff, the things that we are talking about, should not just be for those who have.
Yeah, agreed. I'd like to thank you all for joining today. It's been a very incredible discussion. And, I've been in this industry 32 years, but never more excited than right now. So thank you all for your contributions here and folks that dialed in. And we look forward to, a really bright year now that we're starting to come out of the pandemic and getting together and making this happen.
Happy Earth Week.
Happy Earth Week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us today. A link to the recording for this digital discussion will be made available within 24 hours. If you'd like to hear more on decarbonization, check out this session at SPI ESI and Smart Energy Week on September 21st in New Orleans. Remember to use the discount code on the screen when registering for SPI ESI and Smart Energy Week for your special discount to this year's premier energy event. In the meantime, here's what Solar Power Events has on the horizon. See you next time.